The king threw the divorce papers at my feet, expecting me to beg for his mercy like I had 1,000 times before. He didn't realize that the man who loved him had died in the cold of the left wing weeks ago. I didn't even look at his face. I just picked up a pen, signed my name with a steady hand, and asked, "Is that all? I'd like to get back to my tea before it gets as cold as your heart." Let me tell you something about signing divorce papers. The original owner of this body, the man whose memories I now carry like someone else's luggage, had rehearsed this moment in his nightmares for 2 years. He had imagined the papers arriving on a silver tray. He had imagined himself weeping so hard he couldn't hold the pen. He had imagined throwing himself at the king's feet, pressing his forehead to the cold marble, and begging in a voice that had no more pride left in it. I am not him. I am someone who died in a world with electric lights and convenience stores, who woke up in a body wearing silk robes and a title that meant less than the paper it was written on. I inherited his face, his memories, his position, and his completely catastrophic taste in men. I did not inherit his feelings. Those dissolved somewhere between his last heartbreak and my first breath inside this chest. So when the papers landed at my feet, scattered, dramatic, the king's preferred method of communication, I looked down at them the way you look at a pamphlet someone pushes into your hand on the street. Mildly inconvenient, nothing more. The throne room was very quiet. I remember the light was doing something beautiful through the high windows, the kind of long, late-afternoon gold that doesn't care about human drama. The marble floor was cold through the thin soles of my court shoes. Somewhere behind me, I could feel the held breath of 2 attendants who probably took bets on whether I would cry before or after I read the first page. I crouched down and gathered the papers neatly, tapped them against my knee to straighten the edges. The king said my name, the original name, the one that used to make the original owner's pulse trip over itself. He said it in a voice that was meant to land like a hand on a wound, firm, certain. The voice of a man reminding you who holds the power in this room. I looked up, not at his face. I wasn't ready to waste energy on his face, but at the room behind him. The banners, the carved pillars, the 2 guards standing at attention near the far door, eyes fixed straight ahead, pretending very hard that they were not witnessing whatever this was. "Do you have a pen?" I said, "or should I use mine?" I heard the shift in the room, the held breath finally released, not into relief, but into something sharper. Surprise has a sound. It sounds like a room remembering how to exhale. The king did not answer immediately. I waited. I am very good at waiting now. The original was not. He would fill silences with apologies, with questions, with the soft, desperate noise of someone who needed reassurance the way a drowning man needs air. I have no such need. Silence is simply silence. It doesn't frighten me. The king started. "A pen," I said again, pleasantly. "Or I can send for one. It won't take long." Someone produced a pen. I don't know who. I didn't look. I just took it, found the signature line at the bottom of the last page, and signed. My handwriting is different from the original's, steadier, less ornate, the hand of someone who learned to write in a world that valued efficiency over elegance. I wondered briefly if that would invalidate the document. I decided I did not particularly care. I placed the pen on top of the stack and held it out toward the king. He took it, and in the half-second where the exchange happened, where his fingers came close enough to brush the back of my hand, I pulled back. Not yanked, not flinched, just a calm, deliberate withdrawal, the way you move your hand away from a stove that no longer concerns you. I looked at his face then, because the moment required it. He was staring at me, not with anger, not yet, with something I had no use for, that particular expression men wear when a door they expected to open walks away on its own. Confusion, yes, but underneath it, something else, something I filed away without interest and turned away from. "Is that all?" I asked. "I'd like to get back to my tea before it gets as cold as your heart." I walked out of the throne room. My tea, when I got back to it, was already cold. I drank it anyway. The corridor back to the left wing has 17 windows. I know this because I counted them on the day I moved in, or rather, on the day I was moved. There is a difference. One implies a decision, the other implies weather. The 14th window is always open. The latch is broken and no one has fixed it, because no one fixes things in the left wing unless the person living there fixes it themselves. Tonight, it lets in the smell of coming rain, that particular cold, electric sharpness that arrives before the first drop when the sky is making up its mind. My feet slow without my permission. Not from grief. I want to be clear about that. I have no grief left for what happened in this corridor, in this wing, on the day that the original's world ended and mine, if you could call it mine, began. What I have is something more like muscle memory. The body remembers the rain even when the mind has moved past it. I let myself remember. There is no harm in remembering. It is only dangerous if you are still standing inside the thing you're remembering, and I am not. It was raining the day the king had the original's belongings moved. Not a gentle rain, not the kind that makes things romantic and soft. This was the aggressive, purposeful rain of a season that has decided it is done being polite. The kind that turns courtyards into mirrors and makes silk stick to skin like a cold hand. The king did not come himself. Of course he didn't. He sent the head steward, who had the expression of a man completing a task he found distasteful. Behind the steward came 6 servants carrying trunks, boxes, the small accumulated evidence of 2 years of residence in the East Wing, robes folded carelessly now, where once they had been handled like offerings. The original stood in the courtyard and watched. I know, through his memories, which live in me like a film I've seen too many times, that he had told himself he would be dignified, that he would not cry, that he would hold his chin level and let them see that he was unbothered, that this was fine, that he was fine. He lasted approximately 4 minutes. When the carved sandalwood box hit the stone path, the one that held the pressed flowers from the first garden the king had ever walked him through, early in their courtship when the king had still been trying, the sound of the lid cracking was small, barely audible over the rain. But the original heard it. He heard it the way you hear something that has been waiting to break for a long time. He knelt in the rain and opened the box with shaking hands. The flowers were ruined, wet through, petals dissolving into each other, colors bleeding, stems bent at angles that couldn't be fixed. He held them anyway, sat in the mud in his good court robes and held a box full of ruined flowers, while the servants stepped around him to finish the job they had been sent to do. A hairpin fell out of one of the boxes, one of the original's favorites, pale jade, carved into the shape of a small bird. It landed in a puddle, and the original reached for it, and the servant nearest him stepped on it by accident, or perhaps not by accident, and the jade cracked cleanly in 2. Nobody apologized. The original sat in the rain for a long time after they had all gone, long enough that his robes were soaked through, long enough that the cold had moved from his skin into his bones, long enough that a junior servant from the left wing, a girl of perhaps 15 who had only been assigned there a week, came out with a plain outer robe and draped it over his shoulders without speaking. And that small, wordless kindness broke something in him more completely than the shouting, or the banishment, or the cracked hairpin had. He wept very quietly, in the rain, holding half a jade bird. I stand at the 14th window and breathe the pre-rain air. I think about that girl and her wordless kindness. I think about her more than I think about the king. Then I close the window the way I always close it. The trick is to lift slightly as you push, because the latch only catches if the frame is seated right. And I go back to my room. I have a book I want to finish. He has been knocking for 20 minutes. I know because I have a small water clock on the shelf above my desk. Another repair I made myself, with a cracked basin and some river clay, and a patience I did not know I possessed until this life gave me the time to discover it. The water moves in its slow, indifferent way. The king's knuckles move against my door in a rhythm that has evolved over 20 minutes from authoritative to pleading. I turn a page. The book is a history of herbal medicine compiled by a physician who died 40 years before the original was born. It is dry reading in the way that all genuinely useful things are dry, detailed, precise, committed to accuracy over entertainment. I have been working through it slowly, a chapter at a time, because I have nowhere to be, and the left wing has an excellent window that catches the morning light at exactly the right angle for reading. "I know you're in there," the king says through the door. "I am aware. I only want to talk." He has said this 6 times now. I have counted. The first time it came out with the full authority of a man who is unaccustomed to being ignored. Rounded vowels, clear consonants, the sentence structured like a command wearing a request's clothing. By the 6th time, the authority had gone thin at the edges. It is amazing how quickly certainty erodes when no one confirms it. Please? That is a new word. He introduced it around the 15-minute mark. I noted it without particular feeling, the way you note a change in weather. Interesting. Mild. I closed the book around my thumb to hold the page and look around my room. It is small. Smaller than any room I occupied in the East Wing, smaller than the antechambers of the rooms I occupied in the East Wing. The ceiling has a water stain in the far corner shaped vaguely like a running dog, which I find I like. The floor is plain wood, worn smooth by generations of servants who lived and worked and felt things here long before the original arrived weeping, and I arrived after him, quiet. There is a cracked teacup on my desk. I cracked it myself, dropped it in the first week when I was still adjusting to the proportions of this body, still miscalculating the distance between my hands and surfaces. I repaired it with a paste of flour and rice water and let it dry in the sun. It holds tea perfectly well. There's a thin white line running from handle to rim that catches the light when I hold it up, and I find that line more beautiful than anything in the East Wing's entire porcelain collection. There is a candle that smells like cedar. I found the cedar tips in the kitchen garden and made the addition myself. Small, unnecessary, mine. There are 3 books stacked beside the bed, a blanket that I hemmed myself when the original edge began to unravel, a pair of slippers with one slightly shorter than the other that I wear anyway because they are warm and they are mine, and the slight asymmetry keeps me humble. "I'm not leaving," the king says. I believe him. He has proven in his own unfortunate way to be committed to things once he decides on them. The tragedy of the original's life was that the king decided on the wrong things for 2 years, and only now when the deciding is finished has he turned that same stubborn energy toward what was always right in front of him. It is too late. I want to be kind about that. I want to find a gentle way to explain it. But kindness without truth is just a different kind of cruelty, and I am too tired for cruelty of any shape. I open my book. The water clock moves. Outside my door, the king of this entire kingdom sits down. I hear the soft impact of expensive robes meeting plain wood and continues his vigil. I read about the medicinal properties of chrysanthemum root, which are numerous and genuinely interesting. The candle smells like cedar. The silence between his words belongs entirely to me. The tray arrives on a Tuesday. I know it is a Tuesday because Tuesday is when the left wing's water barrel gets replenished, and the sound of it being filled is the first thing I heard when I woke up. So when the knock at my door came, different from the king's knock, lighter, more official, and I opened it to find one of the palace's senior servants holding a lacquered tray of food, I knew exactly what day it was, and I knew exactly what this was. The food was expensive. That much was clear from the presentation alone. 3 covered dishes in celadon porcelain, a soup bowl with a lid pressed tight to keep the heat, a small plate of fruit arranged with the kind of deliberate care that means someone was trying to make a point. The tray itself was rosewood. The original had owned a rosewood tray once. The king had given it to someone else. I looked at the food the way I look at interesting problems. From His Majesty. the servant said, with the carefully neutral tone of someone who has been trained to deliver messages without editorializing. "I'm sure it's very good," I said. "Please tell His Majesty I said so." I closed the door. In the original's memories, there is a particular fear that lives in the stomach rather than the mind. It is the fear of food that arrives unannounced, unchosen, from hands that have motive. The original had learned this fear the way you learn all the most important things, too late and through direct experience. I don't know for certain that the king would poison me. I want to be fair. He's many things, but I have no firm evidence that he is that. But I have also lived long enough, in 2 lives combined, to know that having no firm evidence is not the same as being safe, and that the difference between those 2 things is exactly the width of a cup of tea you didn't make yourself. So I put on my outer robe, took my candle, and went to the kitchen. The royal kitchen is large enough to be its own small world. It runs on a rhythm of fire and water and the particular organized chaos of people who are very good at their jobs and know it. There are 6 fires going at any given mealtime, 3 prep counters always occupied, a hierarchy of chefs so precisely maintained that everyone knows exactly where they stand and what they're allowed to touch. When I walked in, it went quiet. Not the silence of alarm, the silence of recalibration, of people adjusting their understanding of what kind of morning this was going to be. I recognized the head chef, an older man, with forearms like rope and an expression that had, over 40 years of service, learned to reveal absolutely nothing. "I'd like to use the small fire in the corner," I said. "I won't be long." He looked at me for a moment, then he nodded and stepped aside, and the kitchen resumed its noise around me like water closing over a stone. I found rice in the storage alcove, a clay pot on the lower shelf, and water from the central barrel. I lit my fire from the neighboring flame and set the pot over it and measured the rice by eye because I no longer need to measure things I do regularly. This is a satisfaction the original never got to feel. The specific competence of a repeated task, the way your hands know what to do before your mind is finished deciding. I was aware of the king in the doorway approximately 2 minutes after I began. I did not turn around. The kitchen was aware of him too. I felt it in the particular quality of the quiet that settled over the staff nearest the door, the kind of quiet that is not the absence of noise, but the careful management of it. Spoons moved more deliberately. Eyes found other places to be. The rice began to soften. The steam came up in a clean white column. The king said, "You rejected the food I sent." "I did," I agreed. "It was prepared by the head chef, tasted by 3 servants before it reached you." "I know." "Then why?" "Because I didn't ask for it," I said. I stirred the congee once, gently, the way you treat something that needs time rather than force. I find I prefer to eat things I've chosen myself. It's a small preference, I hope you understand. The silence from the doorway had a different texture from the silence of the kitchen staff. The kitchen staff were quiet the way professionals are quiet, with dignity, with discretion, with the unspoken agreement that whatever was happening was not their business and they had rice to attend to. The king was quiet the way someone is quiet when they have prepared something to say and the conversation has moved somewhere they didn't anticipate. I plated the congee in a plain bowl, set it on the prep counter, sat down on the stool there, picked up a spoon, and began to eat. The congee was good, simple, well-seasoned, warm in the way that plain food is warm, not because of any particular skill, but because it was made by my hands from my mouth, and there was no performance in it anywhere. The king stood in the doorway while I ate. The royal chefs moved around their fires. I did not offer him a bowl. When I was finished, I washed the bowl myself, thanked the head chef, and walked back to the left wing. I heard the king follow me most of the way down the corridor before he stopped. I didn't look back. The king has a habit of standing too close. I suspect he does not know he does it, that it is an unconscious reflex of a man accustomed to taking up space, to having the space around him adjust in return. Today, in the corridor outside the kitchen, before I turned away, he was close enough that the smell of him reached me. Sandalwood, something floral beneath it, jasmine, maybe, or gardenia. expensive, designed. My hand tightened on the bowl I was carrying, then loosened. I noted the tightening with a detached interest of a physician noting a patient's response to a stimulus. Interesting. Residual. Not mine. The smell of that incense always used to make the original's heart race. Now it just makes me want to open a window. There was a banquet. This is how the original's memories give it to me, as a room first. A very large, very bright room, hung with silk the color of deep water, lit by more candles than I could count. The kind of room that is designed to be witnessed, to make the people inside it feel they have arrived at something important. The original arrived. He had dressed carefully. The original always dressed carefully for the king's events, with the particular care of someone who has learned that appearance is armor, that beauty is the only currency that keeps being accepted when all the others have been revoked. His seat was not where it should have been. He stood at the entrance of the banquet hall and looked at the high table and understood in the space between one breath and the next what kind of evening this was going to be. His seat, the seat to the king's right, the seat that had been his for 2 years, the seat that had a small scratch on the left armrest from the time he had caught his ring on the wood, had someone else in it. The someone else was young, beautiful in the way that new things are beautiful, fresh, unblemished, lit from within by the specific confidence of someone who has just been told they are the most important person in the room. He was wearing robes in the original's color, not similar, the same. The king was laughing at something the someone else had said. The original was seated at the far end of the lower table, third from the end, between a minor official whose name he didn't know and an empty chair. He sat down. He ate nothing for 3 hours. Not from dramatic refusal. The original was not theatrical in his suffering, which made it worse, somehow, but because his throat had closed in the way that throats close when the body understands something the mind is still negotiating. He drank water. He watched the candles. He watched the king's face from far away, the way you watch something you used to be allowed to touch. At some point in the second hour, the someone else in his seat leaned close to the king and said something private, and the king smiled. Not the public smile, the real one. The one the original had believed until that evening was his alone. The original pressed his hands flat on his thighs under the table. He sat still for 3 hours. He did not make a sound. What I find most devastating about this memory, and I have examined it many times, the way you examine an object you found in someone else's house, curious about what it tells you about the person who chose it, is not the cruelty of the seating or the robes or the smile. It is the minor official who, around the second hour, offered the original a piece of preserved plum from his own dish. Not with ceremony, not with pity, just a quiet lateral slide of a small dish across the table, and a look that said plainly, "I see you, and I'm sorry this is happening, and I have nothing better to offer than this plum." The original did not eat the plum, but he looked at it for a long time. I think about that man sometimes. The minor official whose name the original never knew. I hope his life was kind to him. I hope someone at some point offered him a plum. I stayed close to the kitchen fire longer than I needed to. I know I did. I watched the heat move in the air above the flame, that invisible shimmer that bends light without breaking it, and I let it touch my face longer than the kanji required, longer than the situation warranted. The head chef didn't comment. Neither did anyone else. The king noticed. I felt his attention land on me and shift, the way attention does when it finds something unexpected. I did not explain myself. How do you explain the specific gratitude of a warm fire to someone who has never been cold? The winter the king cut the stipends was not a dramatic winter. That is the thing no one tells you about cruelty. It rarely arrives in dramatic form. It arrives in the small administrative language of revised documents and withdrawn authorizations. The original received a letter, not from the king, from the Treasury Office, brief, formal, the language of bureaucracy rather than malice, which somehow made it worse. The monthly household funds for the left-wing residency were under review pending reassessment. The heating allocations for secondary wings had been restructured for the coming season. Any concerns could be directed to the third-floor administrative office, which was open on Tuesdays and Thursdays between the hours of... The original folded the letter and put it down on his desk. He sat with it for a while. Then he went through his remaining stores. 2 months of modest provisions if stretched carefully. 1 month if not. Enough wood for 2 weeks of heating. A winter coat that had not been replaced in 3 seasons and was beginning to wear through at the elbows. He was methodical about the inventory. I respect that about him. Even in the worst moments, the original was methodical. He made his list and he looked at it, and he understood, without anyone having to say it plainly, that the revised allocations were not a bureaucratic error. They were a message, signed with the precise, deniable language of an official letter from the Treasury. "Sign the papers," the message said, "or be cold." The original did not sign the papers. He gave his warmest extra robe to the servant girl, the same one who had brought him the plain outer robe on the rain day, when he found her shivering on her way to morning duties. He did not think of this as sacrifice. He thought of it as obvious. She was colder than he was. The robe should go where the cold was worst. This is the arithmetic of a person who has not yet learned to preserve themselves. He burned letters to stay warm, methodically, one at a time, in the small brazier in his room. Not his own letters, the ones he had received. The ones from home before the original's family had grown distant. Official correspondence, festival invitations, the paper accumulation of a life that had briefly been about more than survival. And then, when those were finished, the king's letters, the ones from early in the courtship, written in a hand that had been confident but not unkind, full of sentences that had once made the original press them to his chest in the dark. He burned those last, carefully, without ceremony, with the specific, steady grief of someone dismantling something that no longer serves. 3 weeks. He held out for 3 weeks. I have been here 3 months, and I am not cold because the first thing I did when I arrived in this body was fix the broken latch on the heating duct, sourced cedar chips from the garden to improve the air quality, and organized the remaining provisions with the efficiency of someone who grew up reading about wartime rationing for fun. I do not love this man. That is a much easier thing to survive. He intercepts me on my morning walk. I take the same path every morning, out through the left wing side gate, along the lower garden wall where the old plum trees grow, around the ornamental pond that has been half drained for repairs since before I arrived, back through the herb section of the kitchen garden where I sometimes collect things the cooks have overlooked. It takes 40 minutes at the pace I prefer. I have done it every morning for 3 months. I find routine useful. It gives the day a shape. The king is standing at the junction of the plum tree path and the pond path as though he arrived there by accident. He did not arrive there by accident. He has the expression of a man who has rehearsed. I slow my pace but do not stop. He falls into step beside me. "I've been thinking," he begins. I say. "About..." He pauses, recalibrates. Whatever he prepared, it was apparently designed for a version of me that asked questions to help him along. I give him nothing. He continues. "About the way things were handled, the left wing, the winter. The plum trees are beginning to bud. Small, tight, white at the tip where the petal is starting to push through. Another 3 weeks and they'll be open. I make a note to come out to see them when they are." "The king handled it poorly," the king says. I consider this statement with the fairness it deserves. He did handle it poorly. This is accurate. I do not feel the need to reward accuracy with more than acknowledgement. "Yes," I say. He waits. I think he expected the yes to be followed by something, anger or tears or the beginning of a negotiation. I have nothing to add. Yes is a complete sentence. "Is that all you want to say?" he asks, and his voice has an edge now. Not anger, something rawer than anger, something that does not have a clean name. "I want to ask about the property division documents," I say. "I reviewed the draft and I think the eastern storage buildings should be reclassified before the final." He stops walking. I take 3 more steps before I stop as well and turn to look at him. He is standing on the garden path in the early morning light with the expression of a man who has suddenly and without preparation understood that the ground has changed under him without his noticing. His carefully prepared speech, I can see the remnants of it in his face. The architecture of what he meant to say is in ruins. I'm not talking about buildings, he says. I know, I say. I'm trying to apologize. I know that too. He looks at me, and I look back at him, and the morning light is very clear and very fair and lights us both equally, without preference. There's a bird doing something enthusiastic in the plum trees. Then why won't you? Because an apology, I say, requires someone on the other side to receive it, and the person you hurt isn't here anymore. I let that land, then add, gently, because I am not cruel. He burned your letters to stay warm. He's gone. I'm sorry. The papers were signed. The king's hand moves, toward me I think, some reaching impulse, and I step back. Not dramatically, just a small definitive step, the length of a closed door. The property documents. Eastern storage, before the month's end, please. I walk back toward the left wing. Behind me, I hear nothing. No footsteps, no voice. Just the bird in the plum trees, entirely unconcerned. Word travels in a palace the way water travels in stone, slowly, quietly, and through every crack you didn't think to seal. I become aware of the shift gradually. A junior servant who used to step aside from me with a perfunctory courtesy given to minor palace residents now bows properly, the kind of bow that means something. The kitchen staff, who were initially carefully neutral about my presence in their domain, have begun to leave small things on the prep counter when I come in. A piece of good fruit, the best clay pot, the fire already lit. Not with ceremony, just there. The left-wing servant girl, the one who brought the robe, the one who received mine, knocks on my door one evening with a jar of preserved plums she says she made herself. I invite her in for tea. Her name is May. She has been in service since she was 12. She tells me this without self-pity, in the matter-of-fact tone of someone who has arranged their life around what is rather than what might have been. And I recognize that tone the way you recognize a dialect of a language you learned young. She tells me that the other left-wing servants used to call this the forgotten quarter. Not to be cruel, just as a description. The wing the palace forgot to care about. It's better now, she says, looking around my room. At the repaired latch, the cedar candle, the hemmed blanket, the water clock. I just fixed what was broken, I say. She nods, like this is both simpler and more profound than anything else she has heard this week. After she leaves, I sit with a jar of preserved plums and think about the minor official at the replacement banquet and his small lateral kindness, and I think maybe this is how the original should have been loved. Not from above, not from a throne, not with the particular arrogance of someone who believes that being chosen by power is the same as being valued, but small, lateral, like a plum pushed across a table. The king knocks twice that night, brief, uncertain, like a question he hasn't finished formulating. I am already asleep. He brings me a hairpin. I find this out because May tells me, with the careful expression of someone delivering information she has correctly assessed as significant. His Majesty visited the palace jeweler 3 days ago and commissioned a hairpin in pale jade, carved in the shape of a small bird. I am quiet for a moment. Then I say, he found out about the one that broke. Yes, my lord, May says. I look out the window. The plum trees are in full bloom now. I went to see them in the early morning, before anyone was about, stood among them in the cold white light with the petals just beginning to fall, one at a time, which is how beautiful things end. Not all at once, one at a time. Tell me, I say, does it look like the original one, the carving? May hesitates. I was told it's very fine, my lord. The jeweler was given a description. I nod slowly. This is the thing that the king will never understand, no matter how many hairpins he commissions, no matter how many mornings he waits on garden paths, or how many doors he sits outside of. He can replace the object. He can find the best jeweler in the kingdom and describe the bird from second-hand accounts and produce something technically superior to the original in every measurable way. What he cannot do is give it to the person who loved it. That person is gone. He burned the king's letters to stay warm, and he wept in the rain over cracked jade, and he sat for 3 hours at the end of a banquet table, not eating a single bite. And somewhere in the long, cold mathematics of all of that, he came to an end. A quiet one, without announcement. The man standing in this body chose different things to love. A cracked teacup, a cedar candle, a girl named May who makes preserved plum, the plum trees in the morning before anyone else is awake. None of these things require the king's permission. None of these things require the king at all. When the king arrives at the left wing gate that evening, carrying something small wrapped in silk, his face arranged into the particular combination of hope and terror that has become his default expression around me, I meet him at the gate rather than making him knock. I want to be kind about this. I have decided to be kind. "I know what you have," I say. "It was a good thought." He looks at me. "Keep it," I say. "Not as punishment, just keep it. Give it to someone it can still mean something to." "There is no one else," he says. His voice is stripped of everything. Title, authority, the careful layering of a man who has spent his life presenting rather than revealing. He is simply standing there in the evening light, holding a piece of jade and silk, being exactly as lost as he is. There is no one else it means anything with. I know, I'm sorry about that. I genuinely am. And I am. This is not performance. There is something here, a man standing in the wreckage of a thing he built badly and only understood when it was finished, that is simply sad. Not my sadness, but sad. "That isn't enough," he says. "Sorry, it isn't enough." No, I agree. It isn't, but it's what I have. I step back through the gate. I slide the latch, the one I fixed, the one that catches perfectly now if you know how to seat it right. I leave on a Thursday. I leave on a Thursday because Thursday is a plain day, not a festival day, not a day with historical significance or seasonal ceremony or any of the other markers that palaces use to make time feel weighty and intentional. Thursday is just the day after Wednesday, doing its quiet work of simply being the next thing. I have 2 trunks. This is significantly less than I arrived with, or rather, significantly less than the original arrived with, on a pelican with flowers in his hair, full of something that looked from the outside like joy, and was, I think, genuine. He had been genuinely happy that day. I have seen it in his memories. The brightness of it, unguarded, the specific happiness of someone who believes in their whole body that the best part of their life is beginning. 2 trunks, a bag of books, the cracked teacup, wrapped in the hemmed blanket, packed with the particular care you give to things are valuable not because of what they're worth, but because of what they've been through. May helps me carry them to the gate. She does not speak much. We have learned over 3 months of tea and preserved plum and the easy quiet of 2 people who don't perform for each other, that speech is not the primary language between us. She helps me settle the trunks onto the cart. She checks the rope twice with the focused attention of someone who wants to be certain everything is secure. "Will you write?" she asks. "Yes," I say. This is the only promise I make when I leave. It is a promise I intend to keep. The palace is quiet at dawn. This is the hour before the administrative machinery of the day begins turning, before the court convenes and the kitchens reach full noise and the corridors fill with the purposeful movement of people who have places to be. The light is gray-pink. The plum trees are losing their last petals. One drifts past my face as I stand at the gate, and I watch it fall without reaching for it. The king is at the main road. I knew he would be. I don't say this with satisfaction. It is simply what I expected, the way you expect rain when the air has that particular pressure. He is standing at the road that leads away from the palace gates, in plain outer robes, not court clothes, not the full dress of his station, just a man in outer robes in the early morning, which is perhaps the most honest I have ever seen him look. He says my name. Not the title, the name. The original's name, which I have worn for 3 months with the slight awkwardness of borrowed clothing, something that fits but was not cut for this body. I walk toward him, and I do not slow down, and this means he has to walk with me or be left behind. and he chooses to walk with me. We cover 20 paces together before he speaks. "Tell me what to do," he says. "Tell me what to fix. I'll fix it, all of it, whatever you name." "There's nothing to fix," I say. "There doesn't," I say. Not unkindly, just clearly. Some things end, not because someone wins and someone loses, just because they're finished. "I'm not finished," he says, and his voice breaks on the last word, not dramatically, not in the way of someone who is prepared to break, but in the way of something that has been holding its shape through pressure and can't anymore. It is a private sound. I was not meant to find it moving. I find it, a little, moving. "I know you're not," I say. "That's the hard part, I know." I stop walking and turn to him fully, something I have been sparing with because his face in the original's memories is cataloged with a completeness that makes looking at it complicated. But he deserves to be looked at for this. "The man who loved you is not coming back. That love is gone. You can mourn it. You should mourn it, but you cannot call it back by standing in a road." He looks at me with the face of someone in freefall. "The kingdom still needs its king," I say. "The work is still there. That's something. It's not nothing." I turn back to the road. "Is this all it was?" he asks behind me. "Was none of it? It was real," I say, without turning. "His love was real. Every letter he burned was real. Don't comfort yourself with the idea that it wasn't. It was, and you had it, and it deserved better than what you gave it." A long pause. The dawn light is getting stronger, warming the gray towards something closer to gold. "I'm sorry," the king says. "I know," I say. "I know you are." I begin walking. I do not look back. This is not drama. I do not need the image of him standing in the road to feel complete. I don't need to mark the moment with ceremony or weight it with looking. The original looked back too many times. He looked back from the east wing and from the banquet and from the rain-soaked courtyard. He spent 2 years looking back, and every time the looking cost him something he couldn't afford. I keep my eyes on the road. The morning opens around me, the smell of it, fresh and plain and belonging to no one. The sound of the city beginning its day somewhere in the distance. The weight of 2 trunks on a cart behind me that holds a cracked teacup and a hemmed blanket, and 3 months of a life I built from nothing with my own 2 hands. It is enough. It is more than enough. It is, in fact, everything. The end.